Mexico's growth has underwhelmed in the last 2 years, but some feel that the key to reinvigorating the Mexican economy in the long run rests on the success of a reform package proposed by the Pacto por Mexico coalition, and in particular, the controversial energy reform. To get a better sense of what is at stake, I sat down with Latin America energy expert John Padilla.
Mexico remains a vastly underexplored energy market, hydrocarbons market. Although Mexico was the second largest producer back in the 1910s, and with the discovery of Cantarell, which at its peak was producing over 2 million barrels per day, you take a look at the number of wells that have been drilled in Mexico vis-a-vis the US or vis-a-vis Canada, and these numbers pale in comparison. A quick little reference point would be just looking at the level of activity in the Gulf of Mexico on the US side, and if you ever fly over the Gulf, you see rigs all over the place, and as soon as you go into Mexico airspace, it is the equivalent of the Mojave Desert. So there's massive potential, certainly within deep water, but also within onshore activities. There's been a lot of focus in terms of unconventionals. The EIA has come out and said that Mexico is absolutely top 10 in terms of potential resources, and when you add in those potential resources with the deep water, Mexico would easily outstrip Kuwait in terms of total reserves. And if you take a look then also at onshore activity, even existing fields, most of those fields have not seen new technology, major new technology come in over the last 30 years. And the leaps and bounds that we've seen in terms of technology and know-how is massive. And applying some of those kind of techniques when people are then given the right risk-reward parameters should stimulate substantial amounts of activity, which will then also have a multiplying effect throughout the economy. So it's just not the investment and the number of direct jobs that get created, but it's all the indirect activity that an energy reform in Mexico could have.
And what is your sense of how the international community has responded to the proposed reforms? Do you get the sense that there's a lot of interest in moving into the Mexican market to the extent that it opens up?
Well, I think there's been a long-standing level of skepticism that goes back to 2000 when President Vicente Fox promised energy reform. There was euphoria, but at the end of the day, nothing happened. And so the fear that a lot of people have is that the reform gets watered down, or that it's not as robust and dynamic as it needs to be. I think that in terms of the international community, it's a bit of a wait and see game. So they want to see exactly what is going to be included and how robust and dynamic, as I said, it's going to be.
And so far, do you feel that the government, the reform that's being put together is an aggressive one, a conservative one? Do you think that it's heading in the right direction?
Back in August, President Peña Nieto announced the energy reform. And although the proposed reform was only with respect to constitutional reform, and there's two pieces. You need to pass the constitutional reform, and then you have secondary legislation that will need to be passed. President Peña Nieto decided to provide what I would call kind of guidance, and so it was at that time he had said that there were going to be profit-sharing agreements. And that clearly did not sit well with the private sector. And I would also say with many of the Mexican industrialists and individuals that are interested in investing, particularly in unconventionals, because the onshore activity is where people are going to be most active. The Mexican companies, et cetera, will be most active. So as a result, what we've seen is that I think they've gone back. The PAN, in our view, has been driving this reform, and they had made very clear that they would not pass a reform that only included profit-sharing agreements. And as a result, today they're discussing the new energy reform proposal, and the indications are that it includes potentially licenses, production sharing, and possibly even concessions.
Some people are expecting a major growth bump as soon as whatever reform is passed. Do you think that's overly optimistic, or what kind of effect do you think this can have on the short term for Mexican growth?
The devil's always in the details, and we'll have to see exactly what is actually potentially passed here before the end of the year in terms of constitutional energy reform. There's many components as to how they'll actually pass the reform, and there's certain articles and transitory articles that are likely to be included that will kind of dictate the path forward. It'll be an initial good indication, but it won't determine the final outcome of just how successful the energy reform is. So my expectation is that if we do get passage of constitutional reform that includes licenses, production sharing, that's a good start. There's other pieces involved in terms of the regulator, in terms of the sovereign fund, which will matter, and those will be important. And then the other major component will be Pemex, and what exactly happens with Pemex, and whether certain language will be included in the reform addressing how possibly round zero will take place, and what its functions may or may not be going forward.
From your expert opinion, what would you hope for the role of Pemex to be in the future?
I think it's important for Mexico and the long-term sustainability of energy reform that you have a healthy Pemex. It can't be all things to all people. This is a massive energy market, and having an integrated company that is focused on all the upstream opportunities that exist, from deep water to shallow water to onshore to unconventionals. It's impossible for them or any private company or other NOC to be expert in all of those areas. So choosing from those areas is going to be important. Then you have pipeline business, you have petrochemicals, and you have a refining business, which has been bleeding money for now some time. The most important component, in my view, is that they are a healthy entity that is learning and creating economic wealth for the good of the country, and that those components will then really dictate and allow for a long-term sustainable energy reform in Mexico.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you.